And just like that, Season 5 for the Seattle Kraken is underway with Game 1 in the books. And for the first time in Kraken history, after one game, 82-0 is still on the table. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R. Welcome to Season 5, and yes, the Kraken, for the first time in franchise history, win the first game of the season, the home opener as well, the first time they've won their home opener, so a double first for the Kraken, as they defeat the Anaheim Ducks 3-1 in a game that, as we'll get to, was not always pretty, but they found a way to overcome some self-inflicted hardships, or challenges maybe is a better word for it, and get things turned around and eventually get this game over with 2 points in the standings. But before we get to the game, with this being the first game of the season, a new coaching staff, and some new players as well, it's probably worth going a little bit more in depth. I don't know if in depth is the right way, but a little bit more in detail over what the line combinations looked like for the Kraken to start this game, as they did turn out to be pretty different from pretty much anything we saw in the preseason. The first line really probably shouldn't have come as too much of a surprise. It's the probably three best forwards on the team, or at least best center with the two best wings, at least for the time being anyway. That being Matty Beniers with McCann and Eberle on either side. Though I suppose it's also maybe worth mentioning that they were the line on the ice when the Ducks scored their only goal, though as we'll see, that wasn't, I don't really think, too much on them in that particular situation. The second line for the Kraken was the right line with Tolvanen and Schwartz on either side, so yeah, you can see where that makes some sense. They really didn't produce very much offensively in this game. They had a bit of a chance later on in the third period when the Kraken really were starting to get things turned around, or had things somewhat turned around and were starting to play a little bit better, but didn't produce a ton offensively, and did play pretty decently defensively back the other way. And then your third line is a pretty different looking line. It does feature one of the new Kraken players in Mason Marchment on one of the wings of Chandler Stevenson, and Ryan Winterton on the other wing, who was with the team throughout all of the cuts in preseason, but I wasn't necessarily expecting him to get the start, and well, here he is, and played pretty well in this game. Did a lot of the type of things that you want to see a third line grinder type of player do, some block shots, some good back checks, and played pretty well in his own end of the ice. Didn't get on the score sheet at all, but a pretty solid performance from Ryan Winterton, doing a lot of those things that especially a defensively focused coaching staff really like to see. And sure enough, that was mentioned after the game by Lambert, that Winterton did all the things that they were looking for him to do, and is going to make it harder for them to not continue to give him ice time. And then the fourth line is another line with a couple of new faces centered by Frederic Gaudreau, or Freddie Gaudreau, with Ty Cartier and Yanni Newman on the other side. So Newman falling down to the fourth line, at least he's getting ice time, and didn't really produce much offensively. That line had a couple of good shifts here and there, but didn't spend a ton of time on the ice as you would expect from a fourth line. Still, they had some good moments and played pretty well defensively, and at least had something going offensively a couple times in the game. Defensive pairings, meanwhile, shuffled around a little bit, it seemed like, as the game went along, but in the end, the vast majority of the time was spent with three fairly solid defensive pairs. You had Montour and Lindgren getting the most time out on ice. Montour in particular, as we'll see, had a pretty good night. Then the pairing of Dunn and Larson, not too far behind them, though they might have got a little bit less ice time after a particular incident that led to the first goal for the Ducks, and only goal for the Ducks. And then finally, the third pair would be Alexiak and Josh Mahura, with, of course, Cale Fleury then being a healthy scratch, and Riker Evans on IR to start the season. But then jumping into the game with, obviously, Decord in net, the Kraken still carrying Grubauer and Murray, but Grubauer ends up sitting on the bench as the backup goaltender for this game. Murray in the box in his suit. Still, it didn't really matter. Decord was fantastic for the Kraken in net and needed to be in the first period, but maybe not necessarily right away, as the Kraken do get off to a good start, and just a couple minutes into the first game of the season, they have their first lead of the season, as Vince Dunn, coming into the offensive end, gets a pass from Larson, picks his spot, takes his shot, and buries it into the near side top corner over the blocker side of Dostal, which would become a bit of a theme for the Kraken over the course of the night, though this one was certainly helped even if not with an official assist, as the secondary assist goes to Jaden Schwartz on this one. But Eeli Tolvanen screening in front as he kind of flashes the face of Dostal before Dunn takes this shot, also using an Anaheim player as a bit of a screen as well. So Dostal can't see the shot coming all that well, and it goes right over his blocker shoulder into that near side of the net to give the Kraken that early lead. Unfortunately, while Dunn giveth the Kraken a lead, he also took it away. He was largely responsible, the most responsible, for not even 2 minutes later. At least they got through the whole hoopla and fun announcement of the first goal, which is always, more fun, the first official goal of the season, before Dunn behind the Kraken net just makes a terribly ill-advised pass, a backhand. I don't think it was fully no-look pass, but it's going to no one in particular. But instead of going to no one in particular, which would have been better in this particular situation, it ends up going to the closest player to the path of the puck, right onto the tape of Mason McTavish, who notably is not a Kraken player. He's one of the potential star young forwards, up-and-coming stars in this division for the Ducks. And he says, thank you very much, takes that puck in not too much longer, ends up finding Beckett Seneca in his first NHL game on the far side in the back door. He taps it in after freeing himself from Dunn. He's the player that was fighting with Dunn for the puck. Dunn doesn't even get turned around by the time Seneca finds his way to the far side of the net. He gets found by McTavish, and the Ducks even up the score within 2 minutes of the Kraken taking the lead. And from there, well, that play would kind of set the tone for the Kraken, unfortunately, for the rest of the first period, as they continue to make sure that Daccord is really getting the rust knocked off here early in the season. I don't know if he really needed the extra work, but Daccord was getting a lot of extra work here throughout the first period, with the Kraken pretty consistently turning over the puck at least once before eventually getting it out of their own end. Lots of defensive zone turnovers, a few more decently good chances for the Ducks, or at least some open looks. The one part I will say the Kraken did pretty well throughout all of this, and what, aside from great play from Daccord, helps them get through the rest of the first period without giving up the lead and allowing the Ducks to start taking over this game, is that they were, for the most part, doing a pretty good job of keeping the Ducks away from the front of the net, and at least giving Daccord fairly clean looks at every Ducks shot, with the one exception of a flurry of shots that come kind of midway through the first period, where there's a wraparound chance that Daccord sees coming, gets his toe to that corner, and then has to make a couple more rebound saves with a little help from Lindgren that does end up obviously not leading to another Anaheim goal. The Ducks do almost get one other goal, and it looks like they had it. It was originally ruled a goal, but then ends up getting waved off without even a review. As a puck that was shot on net somehow is from a tight angle, somehow ends up on the top of, I think, the side of Daccord's skate, or somewhere in his foot padding. No one really seemed to know where it was. I don't know if they whistled it dead or why they ended up waving this off, but it would have certainly made sense to wave it off, because the way it ends up going in is a Ducks player, after a couple seconds, comes in and just pushes Daccord's pad in with his stick, and the puck comes loose and goes in off of his foot, which you can't push a goaltender's pad into the net and have that be the reason the puck crosses the line. So rightfully so, they do wave it off before the Kraken even challenge the play. I think they would have had a pretty good case for winning the challenge had they needed to, but fortunately the officials get it right in the moment. The Kraken don't have a challenge, and the Ducks don't end up with the lead. The Kraken, again, thanks to some bend a whole lot, bend a little bit more, give the Ducks a couple extra chances, but don't break defensive play from the Kraken. Fantastic goaltending from Daccord. They're able to survive the rest of a first period where they gave themselves a lot of unnecessary extra challenges, and get to the second, where after some, as McCann put it after the game, yelling in a good way in the locker room, they come back out in the second period, and although it takes a little bit to get things started turned back the other way, the Kraken do certainly look improved in the second period and do start to turn this game around over the course of the middle 20 minutes. And that's certainly helped along by the fact that just 3.5 or maybe a little bit under 4 minutes into the second period, after the Ducks had gotten off to a decent start to the second, in some ways kind of picked up where they left off in the first, It's a nice play in the Kraken end of the ice by Brandon Montour, who reaches his stick around one side of a Ducks player, pokes it off of his stick, then goes around the other side, beats, I think it was Troy Terry to that puck, beats all the Ducks to that puck, down the boards, down deep into the Ducks end behind their goal line, before eventually getting to it along the boards and throwing it out into the low crease, where Mason Marchment is waiting, and he just one taps that puck into what's now the far side in this particular case, but that same top corner over the blocker hand of Dostal and into the back of the net to give the Kraken the 2-1 lead. And Mason Marchment joining a pretty lengthy list, a pantheon almost, of Kraken players who score in their first game with the Kraken. And also, after Marchment in particular had not had a particularly good first period, this really started to turn his game around as well as the Kraken as a team. He did end up looking, I think, pretty decent over the back half of this game, though the first few shifts certainly of his stint as a Seattle Kraken were not the best ever, but at least on this play he was in the right place at the right time and would have a couple good passes later on that could have led to more Kraken goals. This is the only time he ends up on the score sheet, but it's an important one, turns out to be the game winner. And a fantastic, great, as Lambert said after the game, elite play from Montour to make it all happen in the first place. And Marchment ends up being on the receiving end and cashes in. And the Kraken would allow one more good chance for the Ducks not long after this. So again, kind of testing the waters with that whole theme that the Kraken have had for most of their existence of as soon as they score a goal, you really kind of cross your fingers for the next 2 minutes or so that the other team doesn't have a quick response. They get a good chance, but Decord makes that save, and then the Kraken really do start to turn things around and take over this game. They end up getting the first power play of the game, which nearly capitalizes just seconds in, but McCann has a bit of a swing and a miss at what did require a pretty quick little shot at what would have been a tap-in. If he hits it, it's in the back of the net, but he misses the puck on its way past him, and then that power play kind of fizzles from there. The Ducks end up with a power play that really doesn't go much of anywhere, and the Kraken take the momentum into the second intermission and keep it as the third period gets started. A third period which, like the previous two, not far into it, the Kraken are on the board again. And this time, just a little bit over 4 minutes into the period, so taking them a little bit longer to score each period in this game, though they do at least score in each period, and as long as you don't give up 3 goals the other way, that's plenty, and in this particular case it was. But it is, this time, that first line that finally gets on the board after a few pretty good chances. Beniers had a couple of passes that just didn't quite find the mark. There's a few spots where really across the team, but even with this line, guys that have played together before and spent a long time with the Kraken, that they just didn't quite seem to be meshing perfectly. Just passes weren't going tape to tape. Things weren't quite lining up the way you'd like to see it, but it's early in the season. McCann didn't even play pretty much the entire preseason, so there's going to be some rust to knock off. On this particular occasion, though, they do link up pretty effectively on a nice passing play in the offensive end as Eberle gets the puck into the offensive end up at one corner, and then without much of a passing lane to Beniers coming down the far side or McCann still entering behind him, instead of taking any of those bad options, Eberle takes the correct one and throws it down to the far corner on the far side down behind the net. Beniers is able to win that foot race, which I think Eberle could see was the likely scenario there. Beniers gets to the puck first down in the corner, and then a one-touch pass with a guy right up in his face off the boards out into the low slot where McCann has been left all alone. The puck gets right to him. He doesn't take long before chipping it over that same near side blocker hand into the top corner past Dostal, the same exact place that the Kraken scored the first 2 goals, this time from in tight on Dostal. Similar in some ways, I suppose, to how Marchment scored his, though Marchment went far side from where the pass came from, and in this case, McCann goes near side from where the pass came from, but all 3 Kraken goals going over the blocker hand shoulder of Dostal. And the Kraken take the 3-1 lead as McCann gets his first of the season. Beniers, after a couple pretty good passing attempts to specifically actually McCann earlier on in the game that didn't quite link up, this time it does, and the Kraken have the multi-goal lead, which they're able to carry throughout the rest of the third period. They do get another power play that doesn't really go much of anywhere. They had another pretty decent chance on that power play that just doesn't quite find the net. Another near miss type of situation. But it doesn't matter. They're able to ice the rest of this game away. Don't hit the empty net. There was a couple moments where Daccord had the puck on his stick behind the net, but couldn't quite get, I think, the puck the way that he wanted it to try and take a shot. So he ends up ditching it before it turns into something bad. He also had one other chance where there was a kind of soft dump in towards him that he catches in his glove, and it got whistled dead immediately. And I don't know if he was hoping that he would have a chance to just drop it and take the shot, but that probably would have been the chance to do it. Either way, the Kraken get that win, the 2 points in the standings, and for the first time, start off the season the way that you'd like to. All in all then, a good game from the Kraken. Overall, again, didn't get off to the best start. Daccord said, and he did make sure to mention that this was not an excuse necessarily, but he did mention that the first game at home can be a little bit weird of a start for the home team. You have all this kind of pageantry before the game with the player individual announcements, the coach announcements. There's all that kind of ceremony around the first home game and announcing the team to everybody. It's a lot of kind of standing around and distraction from the players from their usual pregame routines, which in some cases, and maybe that was part of it, can kind of distract and get you out of that flow. So maybe that's part of why the Kraken had kind of a sloppy, I think is probably the best word to describe it, sloppy start to the game, but they definitely seemed to settle in. They weathered their own created storm and were able to get things eventually turned around. And even when they were having those issues in their own end of the ice, a lot of defensive zone turnovers, which against a better team could have really allowed this game to get out of hand pretty quick. And well, if they play that same type of first period against Vegas on Saturday, that is what could end up happening. But they were able to overcome that, keep the opposing team for the most part at least out of Daccord's face, and allow him to get clean looks at the shots that were coming in. But yeah, again, they don't allow the Ducks too many chances up in tight against Daccord, and any that they did, Daccord was able to make those stops, get the Kraken to a point where they could start to get things turned around, get the rust knocked off, and start making some things happen the other way. Offensively, the Kraken didn't spend a ton of time in the offensive end. Only a small handful of sustained offensive zone time. They had a couple shifts throughout the game that did have some sustained time in the offensive end, but they were somewhat few and far between. A lot of the Kraken chances were created either on the rush or as quick strikes once they got into the offensive end. You could see that there was certainly, I would say, a concerted effort to get into the offensive end and then really try to get pucks to the net before the opposing defense is able to get set up in the way that they'd like to defend a extended stay in the offensive end. Trying to get something good off of a rebound or deflected shot. There was a couple of different shots the Kraken had from up top that were deflected in. Beniers had a deflection that Dostal was able to save. Dostal had a couple of pretty nice saves in this game, just none over his blocker shoulder, I suppose. And the Kraken eventually do end up finding a couple of spots there. The great play created by Montour, and they're able to get those two chances with Marchment and McCann both going to that low slot, top of the crease type of area, getting up towards the net front. And then even with the goal that did come from farther out, Dunn's on the first one of the game, you still had Tolvanen right there screening in front. So certainly I would say the Kraken, maybe it's being a little bit too general about last season, but the Kraken have really for most of their existence, but certainly last season, have really had some trouble with getting net front traffic on the opposing net. And at least in this game, in either way, they were able to create some of that, and that allowed them to, in some ways, get all three goals. Of course, obviously, with all that being said, we're just one game in against a team that, while a lot of people like what the Ducks did in the offseason, and I would say I'm certainly on the more pessimistic end of my feelings about the Ducks. For me, it's a team that I think the Kraken should be able to be, again, right around in the same spot in the standings, if not above them in the standings. I do kind of think the Kraken are a better team than the Ducks, but certainly against a better opponent like they will face in Vegas on Saturday, it might not go the same way if they play the same game, and we'll see what the Kraken are afforded offensively, how this style of offense fares against a more skilled team like Vegas. But at least for now, it worked in this game. It created enough offense to get them the win with some eventually solid defense and absolute brick wall goaltending. Of course, finally, before we close things out on this first game of Season 5, we do have to get to the Kraken 3 stars, as always, brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you do want to help decide these 3 stars throughout every regular season, and hopefully if things really go well for the Kraken, maybe some post-game or postseason games as well, you can head over to Patreon and support whatever amount you're able to over there. And after every game, I post a poll or not a poll, but a comment thread where you can leave your thoughts on who your 3 stars of the game would be. In this particular case, Patreon and Christopher in particular, for the most part, agreed with the official 3 stars, and the first star I think is pretty obvious. It's Joey Daccord with 35 saves on 36 shots from the Ducks. A fantastic first game from Daccord, picking up where he left off the last couple of seasons. Maybe not necessarily where he left off last year. The end of the season for Daccord kind of tailed off a little bit, but we got to see the Daccord that we are for the most part used to. A fantastic game from him to get that first win of the season. The second star, and also very much kept them in the game in the first so that they could get the game turned around. But the second star, the player that I really do think sparked that turnaround for the Kraken early in the second period, Brandon Montour. He was, to that point, for me, the best skater on the ice for the Kraken. As the game went on, he didn't really seem to have as much of an impact, but he certainly was the best skater to the point where he makes that play happen, poking it off the stick, getting down the ice, beating everyone to it, and then finding Marchment in the low slot for that goal. Marchment also ends up getting one of the official stars. I think he got the second official star, and his game did really turn around from the point of scoring that goal, but got off to a bit of a rough start. For me, Montour played fine the rest of the game, and yeah, was just fantastic there early on, while the rest of the team was still getting their sea legs under them, their hockey legs under them. Either way, we can move on to the third star with, speaking of getting sea legs under them, getting back in the flow of this first R&R of the season. So we're getting through it. But the last star here of this first game, third star for the Kraken, for me, it's going to be Jared McCann. Matty Beniers also mentioned over on Patreon, and I think that was a pretty close second one for me here. Mason Marchment also had a pretty good game, so I think he would be an honorable mention. But for the third star, I think McCann certainly earned it. Had a pretty good game, a couple near misses on power play opportunities, some shots on goal, and eventually does get that third goal for the Kraken. The insurance one that, fortunately, they didn't need that extra insurance towards the end, but it helped feel a little bit more secure in those final minutes once the Ducks did eventually get Dostal pulled. Of course, as always, I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments section below. If you have a different 3 stars, some other guys you like to throw in, if you would want to throw in a Matty Beniers or a Mason Marchment into the mix there. I kind of went off the book there a bit with Montour, but to me, he had such a good, especially start to the game, that he had to be one of the stars for me. Obviously, Daccord, I don't think anyone's going to argue with Daccord as the first star. But some other guys, again, Ryan Winterton had quietly a pretty nice game for the Kraken. Doesn't get on the score sheet, but did do a lot of, especially the defensive end things very well that you want to see from a young player trying to establish himself as a bottom 6 role player for this team. And if he continues to play the way he did in this game, especially against better opponents, then he is going to be a hard guy to take out of the lineup for some other players. Like once the Kraken start to get healthier, Kaapo Kakko comes back in a month, or eventually they're going to try to work in Berkeley Catton once he gets a chance to get a few more practices in, which, by the way, for anybody worried about Catton getting what some people have been calling the Wright treatment, the Shane Wright treatment, I mean, to some degree, yeah, he's in a somewhat similar situation to where Wright was, in that he's too good for, in this case, the WHL. For Wright, it was the OHL. He's not eligible to play in the AHL yet because of age, and he's just not quite polished enough to play in the NHL for a team that is trying to win here early in the season to see if they can get on a run and make something of this young season. Eventually, he'll get some of those kinks worked out. He'll start to figure out the speed of the NHL game, and the way the Kraken under this new coaching staff are practicing, he might actually be able to make that happen, get some of those good reps in practice, which are a lot more fast-paced and more game pace with this new coaching staff than what we've seen in the past. So I think the practices for him are actually quite valuable. What we saw in the preseason, there are definitely flashes of some maybe even superstar ceiling for Catton, but they were also mixed in with a whole lot of ill-advised passes that I think have worked for him throughout his entire hockey career. But now that you're at the more NHL speed of game, he's throwing passes to windows that just close before it ever has a chance of getting through. And those are the type of things that you definitely need to have. I mean, you're going to have rookie moments from any young player, and veteran players still make those mistakes every now and then. We just saw Dunn make one. But the point is, you want to make sure that those are all polished up before you just throw them out there. So not going to worry too much about Catton being a healthy scratch in game 1. He'll probably be a healthy scratch in game 2. Eventually they'll find a way to work him in. And again, the way that this team is practicing right now under the new coaching staff, I think there is a lot of value for him in just being with the team and getting those practices in. Probably more value than he would be getting playing and just continuing to dominate WHL competition. But again, you can let me know what you think about that in the comments. And until next time, for what hopefully the Kraken can surprise and start the season 2-0 by beating Vegas on home ice on Saturday, after hopefully the Mariners win Game 5. And we're feeling a little nervous about that right now, but we'll see how that goes later today as of when you're probably watching this. Anyway, until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.